Hello and welcome to Pit Talk, a Fox Sports and Speed Cafe Formula One podcast. On today's episode, Max Verstappen wins again, this time at the inaugural Las Vegas Grand Prix in a tight battle ahead of Charles Leclerc and Sergio Perez. This was one of the season's better races, but didn't live up to the stratospheric heights of hype Formula One had built it to ahead of the weekend. My name's Michael Laminato, motorsport writer for Fox Sports Australia. It's great to have your company and the company of my co-hosts from Speed Cafe. His Elvis costume is at the dry cleaners. It's
that's
Matt
as good.
Koch.
Was that Elvis? Was that it?
I don't know. Look, it's really up to you. Do whatever you want.
Swiftly, very swiftly.
Also from Speed Cafe, he has no idea what day or time it is, and that's not even a joke.
Never mind month and year as well at the moment, the way I'm feeling.
It's been a very complicated Las Vegas Grand Prix from a lot of different angles. We're going to dissect some of them over the course of this podcast because we finally got in the books Formula One's most hyped race ever. I'm going to go out and just say that in absolute terms because I'm struggling to think of a more hyped Grand Prix. And it was certainly a weekend of ups and downs. Ian, I spoke to you last week for this podcast. I think it's fair to say the mood was pretty high. We were feeling pretty good on the Tuesday, as I think it was, in Las Vegas. You'd just seen in person the giant sphere, which I think everyone's had their fill of over the course of the weekend. But it's fair to say the event itself did not really continue in the first 2 days on that same level of optimism and enthusiasm. So I'm going to start immediately with you. Thursday, as it was there, Friday in Australia, but Thursday in Las Vegas, well, it didn't really go that smoothly for Formula One.
I think that's a little bit of an understatement, Michael, to be fair. Matt's struggling to contain himself.
There's a little bump or two, wasn't there?
Well, it's quite a big bump if you were in a Ferrari.
If you were in Lando Norris's shoes as well, bearing in mind that's what led to his accident on the track. So, where do we start? I mean, just astonishing, wasn't it? 8 minutes in to first practice, and we have this exploding water valve cover, or the concrete seal around it, that pretty much destroyed the entire underneath of Carlos Sainz's Ferrari, had an effect on Esteban Ocon's Alpine, and from that moment, it just went completely downhill for the rest of that, I was going to say day, but rest of that night into the early hours of the following day. You just couldn't make it up. And as you pointed out, Michael, the most hyped race that we've had for such a long time. And it has this disastrous start. And you did wonder, is it going to recover? Because Formula One has invested £500 million, which will be a lot more than that going forward, bearing in mind it's foregoing the entertainment tax and allowing the Vegas authorities to use that as they please. So it's going to cost Formula One hundreds of millions come the end of its contract. And then, of course, we're waiting for the event to unfold, the practice to unfold, and it goes on, the delay. We know things are getting repaired. And then you get this situation because of the United States union labor laws that it has to take care of generally all the support staff in the grandstands, and they kick all the fans out, and just those that were left, those that were either A, die hard, or B, foolhardy for staying until 1:30 a.m. in the morning, waiting to see some track action, they all have to get kicked out. Those that did try and stay were eventually ejected by the police, which just added to the pantomime. And then you have FP2 extended to 90 minutes, being run in front of empty grandstands. God knows what America must have been thinking of that. If you think back to the Michelin tire debacle of 2005 in Indianapolis. And F1 is just left looking like a laughingstock yet again in front of the eyes of an adoring American public at this stage, bearing in mind all the hype that's taken place with Netflix. And finally, we think F1 has cracked America, and then it just falls as flat as a pancake on that particular night that finally finishes at 4 a.m. Even at that stage, everybody's knackered. Never mind the following 2 days where we're finishing at stupid o'clock. And as I've just sent out a story on speedcafe.com for anybody that's interested, it's a great quote from Christian Horner where he says, "Everybody is leaving Las Vegas.
Go on.
F-U-C-K-E-D."
Just say it. Just say
I
it.
won't. Can I? Am I allowed? Am I allowed?
I actually don't know. So
We're all thinking it.
You can try, I guess, and see what
I've
happens.
spelt it out. That's good enough. Let's leave it at that. And that's exactly. He's got it absolutely. He's nailed that one. I can't even get my words out now. That's how tired I'm feeling. It's coming up to 4 o'clock in the morning with me right now. And yeah, it was just a shockingly bad start. There's now a lawsuit pending because the fans that were recompensed, which was only 6%, those holding Thursday-only tickets, were only handed $200 vouchers to spend in the official F1 store. So, hold on. Are they actually getting anything back? No, it's still coming from F1. But as I say, I mean, there's a lawsuit pending. That looks like it's a pile of another swear word I could use as well. It's got so many typos in it. This was like rushed out at the 11th hour. So many typos, so many errors in it that it surely can't possibly succeed. Anyway, that's the way Formula One is leaving Las Vegas with a lawsuit hanging over its head.
Matt, I mean, this... Ian summed it up pretty well. It's a complicated situation. It was an ugly situation, I think. He's really hit all the main points. The drain cover, or the water valve cover as it was, smaller than a manhole, I suppose. Look, that's happened at other tracks. It's been pointed out many times. And it was extremely embarrassing on I guess you could say, let's just say a human level. You know, the height, and then to be tripped up 8 minutes in, that sort of one thing can happen at other tracks, has happened at other tracks. The handling of it, though, is what's subsequently been very interesting. The lack of refunds, the lack of apology. I know in the US, perhaps the most litigious country in the world, apologizing is sometimes quite a hard thing to do for legal reasons. So I can kind of understand that element of it. But considering that Formula One, for the first time, was fully the promoter in Las Vegas was owned by Liberty Media, which owns Formula One, made a big deal about, as a phrase we heard many times over the weekend, almost as if it was the official line, raising the standard, raising the bar of Formula One. Dare I say, it might have been the official line. Can you tally those two ideas, that Formula One's trying to lead the way for all the other promoters it extracts great cash for, but on the other hand seems to have enormously erred with the way it handled a situation?
I think I'm going to borrow a line that a few people used over the weekend, and that we've got to separate the show from the sport. And by the show, we're talking about the pageantry of the ceremony, you know, that bizarre podium post-race interview thing that they did, the cool-down car, that sort of stuff. Completely different, very Vegas, very unique to this event, and that has moved the sport in a different direction and done things that I think other promoters are going to have to start to replicate, a little bit like we saw in the Netherlands with the dance party there. Now other promoters are sort of doing the same thing to keep the fans entertained between on track. But then you talk about the on track, and yes, above the door it says Formula One, but realistically, once the track is open for cars, above the door it should say FIA, because that's their responsibility. So F1 has copped a black eye for a fault that ultimately, and it's not the FIA's fault, but responsibility falls to the FIA. So a failing on that side has left the sport with a black eye, and that's the complication that we've got here. I don't think there was a failing on Liberty Media or Formula One's part. There's no way they could have foreseen a manhole coming up. How they reacted, again, they're a promoter. Their hands are going to be largely tied at that point. The whole pushing fans out of grandstands, it's, again, not a great look, but if the laws are what the laws are, their hands were tied. I guess the question really is, was that the best option? Could they not have done something else with the schedule to avert having to do that and capitalize on the high profile event and not have those negative headlines 8 minutes into this hyped up event. And I guess the FIA's response has also got to be analysed. Was it right in forcing practice 2 through the way it did? Could it not have just gone and extended P3 to 2 hours? Okay, there's some international sporting code and Formula One sporting regulations and all sorts of things that complicate that. Just ask Carlos Sainz and Ferrari. But this is where, as regimented as the sport is, there needs to be a mechanism to take a sensible pill, because by sticking steadfast to the regulations, one, they've destroyed Carlos Sainz's race and weekend. Two, they've made the sport look really bad. And three, what has it gained? We stuck to the rules. Whoopee. So it's a failing of the sporting side of Formula One, not the Formula One side of Formula One, if that makes sense. So it's different. Well, I guess it's the same as what it was in Indianapolis all those years ago. In that back then, it was a failing of the sporting side. It was the FIA unwilling to bend on the rules back then, and I think there it had more of a case. I don't think what it did on Thursday did Formula One any favours, and unfortunately, Formula One is going to be left carrying the can for that. As you say, and with a lawsuit to now deal with as well, although that will probably be swatted away pretty easily. It's been one of those weekends, hasn't it, where it's a bit like Singapore. You sort of leave the track at the end of a day and you're delirious. And I don't know about you guys, but it's felt like that all weekend. Although, Michael, you and I have done this from the comfort or relative comfort of home. It's still late, but we're working to a weird time zone because our day starts in the early evening. Ian, what is it, 4 a.m. or something for you? Is it breakfast time? I can hear some rattling in the background there. Is that the tea coming out, or is it?
No, it's the. I'm sitting very close to where the catering area is. So what you can hear right now is just the guys starting to clear up, because I think everybody's had their fill, quite literally, of this event right now. I've never seen in all my time covering Formula One, and I must be approaching somewhere 300, I think, races now. I've never seen people as tired as this coming at an event. Christian Horner, as I mentioned earlier, summed it up exactly. We're all absolutely shattered. We've got no idea exactly what time it is, how we should be operating in terms of when we eat, when we sleep. And another thing that Christian mentioned, and I absolutely have to agree with him, we cannot be fixated on catering for the TV companies across Europe. The reason why the timing of this event is as it has been, qualifying at midnight, race at 10 p.m, is because midnight and 10 p.m. in the UK and Europe are, try and get it right now, 8 a.m. UK, 6 a.m. UK in terms of qualifying and race. It's got to change for next season. Yes, it's great for the European audience to watch, and I'm sure there was a significant European audience watching as well, given, as we know, the hype of this event. But I think for the health and well-being of everybody concerned, the teams, the backroom staff, all the support staff of this event as well, and all the photographers and media, it's got to change to an early evening time slot around 8 a.m. and basically sod the European TV companies going forward.
Ian, Michael works for a TV company.
Yeah, but
this is good. So let's not change the time. This works for us. This is a nice mid-afternoon.
Works for you guys.
No, but so if it's earlier, it's even better. If it's earlier, it's in the afternoon.
For you guys.
Perfectly fine with that. As a Fox Sports representative, I think it's okay.
I think in 8 p.m. Yeah.
But I do want to ask you, because it's in. And actually, before I do ask, it's worth pointing out, because some people might be watching this race and saying, well, we race at night in other places. Singapore being the prototypical night race, not far from Australia. I can say, just to explain this, I know it's a minor bugbear, Matt, for you and I coming from Australia when we go and cover Singapore, is that it is run on European time. It's not run on Singapore time at night. The entire paddock remains on European time, and 8 p.m. the starting time in Singapore corresponds to 2 p.m. in Europe or the UK, whichever it is. Exactly. And so actually everyone just continues to stave off
you and
jet
I
lag
have to
for
deal with
4 or
it, and the
5
rest of them are
days,
fine. Yeah.
and then deal with it. Yes, exactly. But you and I, frustratingly, despite it being our closest outside of Australia race, have to jet lag ourselves for it. Whereas in Las Vegas, actually, it was kind of run to. They were talking about it being roughly Japanese time, maybe even Singapore time. It wasn't run to European time or United States time, so there was no easy middle ground for people to adjust their body clocks to, and that's why there was so much struggle about this. But I want to ask you about. I mean, you've talked a little bit about how people struggle with the time zone, but the atmosphere generally, the people who are turning up to the race, the fans, as they were on Thursday, who were allowed to stay, and then the ones who subsequently turned back on subsequent days, it was a little bit hard from my perspective back here in Australia to kind of gauge what the race felt like. I was actually a little bit surprised by that because I expected it to play a major role in the way F1 was covering this sport. But in the end, actually, I feel like we saw very few people at all over the course of the coverage. What was it like in terms of the people who were turning up, the atmosphere of the clientele, and I guess of the area generally where the circuit was? What kind of vibe was this race?
Muted, I would suggest. Before heading to the circuit, I pretty much took a walk close to my hotel down the strip nearly every day, and it just looked like Vegas as you would expect it to be. I've been here before, and to be honest, I didn't really notice any change from that visit, which was a personal one, to this one, which was a business one. And I think that's a fair summation. I didn't feel that there was a race here, apart from the giant advertising on the sphere. I couldn't have told if I'd just wandered in, not knowing at all that there was a Grand Prix going to take place, completely blinkered, and I was just here for a short break. I couldn't have told you that there was actually an event taking place. There was a serious lack of publicity, from what I could see. There was just the odd billboard, the odd advertising hoarding here and there. But as I say, it was just Vegas as you would expect Vegas. So it was very strange. And what took place on, was it Thursday night going into the early hours of Friday morning? I can't remember now. Was just utterly surreal. An empty grandstand with cars going round at 4 o'clock in the morning. You can't make that up. You literally, nobody could have forecast that. And then through into the following day, again, it was a little bit busier in the paddock. And then today, obviously, with it being, I say today, God knows what, on the race day itself, at least then it felt like we'd got a Grand Prix on our hands. Hyped with stars, you couldn't move on the grid, and at least then I felt integrated into the event, whereas previously I hadn't, simply because of the hours, the time difference, etc. So, but even now, I'm about to leave the circuit after we finish this podcast, and it's like I'm done with Vegas. I can't wait to get home. But even then, it's only going to be 48 hours because I've got to fly to blooming Abu Dhabi on the Wednesday. So, it's nearly the end of the season. That's all I can say.
It's not been a long year at all. Hasn't been. It's just flown by. Well, what I find interesting is in Formula One's inability to stand out in Vegas. I guess that doesn't come as a surprise, because how do you stand out in a city where everyone is trying to stand out? So it's kind of difficult. And ultimately, would you be trying to promote in Las Vegas itself, or would you not be trying to push it in things like Los Angeles and San Francisco and the other sort of nearby, Salt Lake City, the other nearby major cities? That's where I'd be promoting anyway. But what's his? I saw Ryan Briscoe. I think it was his Instagram. He was just a general paying spectator this weekend, and he had to climb a ladder to get over a fence to get into the circuit. So there's a few bugs there to be ironed out, I think. I know there are concerns with, the setup of some of the logistics. The media room, for instance, Ian will be able to tell you he's a lot fitter now than he was, because it's a fair walk, and it sounds like, oh, woe is us in the media, but it makes a difference to our ability. A happy media makes for positive coverage, and unhappy media getting a good story out of us or a positive story out of a grumpy journalist is difficult. So just those little things, I think there's a lot of lessons there to be learned. But I guess the saving grace is that, Michael, I guess I'm stealing your thunder here by leading into this, is that we probably had a decent race and that Thursday now feels like a long time ago.
I mean, I think that's fair enough. And we use this phrase often with drivers, don't we, that you're only as good as your last race. And Las Vegas, I mean, Formula One organisers must have been breathing an enormous 90-minute sigh of relief over the course of the Grand Prix, because the memory from this race, for all but that 6% who were kicked out on Thursday, never to return without having seen cars for more than 8 minutes, will be that they saw one of the season's better races. I don't have a great memory for sort of actively comparing Grand Prix over a 22 race season. But certainly was one of the more memorable ones, a fight that genuinely took us to roughly the end of the race. The lead was always in doubt. All these kinds of key markers you want from a good Grand Prix. I guess, Ian, from your position where you were, admittedly a hotel was a little bit too far from the paddock to maybe get a great grasp of what the response was like. Was there a positive response in the end? And do you think the general reaction around the circuit we've seen this weekend, some drivers were a little bit sceptical at first, then obviously kind of got a great race. Has the sport got away with all the criticism over the course of the weekend thanks to this race?
A little bit. Thankfully, we did get the race that Las Vegas and the F1 audience deserved, because, as you've mentioned, we were coming into this thinking, if this is not a good race, then F1 in America will find it really hard to recover. It's had the United States Grand Prix in Austin now for just over a decade. The Miami Grand Prix has come onto the calendar, and that's not really been a roaring success, simply because of where it's staged as well, going around the Miami Dolphins American Football Stadium. So after everything that had happened earlier in the event, the last thing the sport needed, the last thing the watching American public needed, was an absolutely boring race. And we got anything but, thank God for that. We had entertainment pretty much, from first corner near enough to last, if you think of Charles Leclerc's move on Checo Perez to get the runner-up position. And the reaction from drivers, team principals, was that in the end, Las Vegas delivered. And I think for the most part, what happened earlier in the weekend, lawsuit aside, will slightly get brushed underneath the carpet now, and we can all start building towards next year's event and ironing out the faults of year one. In many respects, it probably came a bit too soon. If you think that they only started building the pit and paddock complex, which is fantastic, just 1 year ago, there were still lots of areas wandering around, from the 1 kilometre walk, I might add, from the media centre situated inside a hotel to the top of the paddock where they decided to have the FIA press conferences. 1 kilometre. Don't worry, not worries me, but I'm just trying to give listening and watching audience a flavour of just what we were experiencing over here. So thankfully, as I say, the voices coming out were positive, and we do go away, yes, absolutely shattered, but also breathing a sigh of relief that on track it delivered, and we can look forward now to hopefully good races going forward at this venue.
Matt, I'm a little bit, I don't want to say skeptical about the race, because it was a really enjoyable race, and I'm glad it was. And I'm glad it was a good race, not because it was stupid. That was really my worry ahead of the race, was that we were going to have cars crashing every corner. It's too slippery, and more crashes and more safety cars and so on and so forth. And it would be a very big spectacle, but not, that can be exciting, but it's not really a great race when you just have lots of crashes, in my opinion, anyway. In the end, we actually got quite an interesting race. But in the back of my head, I was also thinking about Azerbaijan and the first few races we had there. Now, we had sort of the opposite situation there, where we thought it was going to be a great first year, and it was extremely dull, and it was only in the subsequent years where it livened up. How much do you think, Matt, that this race was really good just because of the challenge of this being a new circuit, kind of unusual cold conditions, circuit was very green, slippery, that'll improve over years? How much of this was the unknown element, and do you think we can actually expect in the next couple of years, or up to 10, as it may well be the case in Vegas, for racing to continue to be good? Acknowledging, of course, that no circuit can be great every year.
I think
but in
looking
general,
at the circuit, the simplicity is its beauty. There's long, high-speed stretches with hard braking zones where he who braves to be latest can succeed or fail, and that's what you want. You want that challenge. I think modern circuit design has got too intricate and too complicated. We've got circuits that have got 20 odd corners on. You think back to Reims in the 1950s, and there were 4. It was a triangle, basically, and yet it produced good racing because you had slipstreaming and all that sort of stuff. You look at NASCAR and IndyCar ovals; they produce good racing because of the slipstreaming and the high speed stuff. So I think having long, high speed straights, that will allow the field to remain somewhat close. It might create some DRS trains, but a mix-up here or a mistake there, like we saw this weekend with Charles Leclerc and a few others making mistakes, the pressure ultimately gets them. If you've got a low-grip surface, which by all accounts, the mix that they've used of the asphalt is likely to remain comparatively low-grip. It's not a high-grip stuff that they used in Saudi Arabia. So a low-grip surface will encourage errors. A bumpy circuit will encourage errors. That adds a degree of natural variation. Add in the long straights, and those errors can be capitalized on by rivals. So I think the basics are there for it to be a good racetrack going forward. There's a couple of things that need to be ironed out. They need a support category or two there to help clean the track up. They need to change the timing of it. It's far too late. It's far too cold. Tidy up some of those bits and pieces, but I think the ingredients are there for Las Vegas to be a good track in the way, I guess, that Baku is a good track for racing.
I'll tell you what I noticed in particular, what came across to me, and I don't know whether it was the same for you guys as well, because of the simplicity of the track that Matt has just mentioned, because of the high-speed nature, what I really noticed, as I said, was the speed of these cars, probably because they're situated between these concrete barriers. I just thought that for me was so exciting, which, yeah, you get an idea of the speeds of cars going around a normal racetrack, but I've never really noticed before, because Monaco, because Baku, because Singapore doesn't really have these high-speed curves, straights. For me, the Formula One cars going around the Vegas track looked authentic, looked genuine, and really brought home just why these cars are the fastest on the planet. And as I said, that was my perspective. I don't know whether that came across from your perspective watching at home.
It was a boring track to watch. You look at. I don't think I think it was television not doing the circuit any favors. There were some camera angles, turn 12, where Lando Norris had his crash. the angle of the camera there made it look almost identical to the final corner in Saudi Arabia. The way the walls hemmed it in, the darkness. I think also being a night race, it didn't have that atmosphere around it. You had no references to what was where and when, and that robbed it of something. It didn't change the on-track action or performance or whatever, but it just didn't have this extra little something that Monaco does, or I guess even Baku for that matter does, because you've got a frame of reference. And for me, yes, the racing was good, but it was a boring track to watch. Like, I can remember looking at old photos and videos of Formula One races from the 60s or from the 50s all the way through probably until the mid 90s or even 2000s. I can look at a photo and tell you exactly which corner and exactly which track they are, because I'm that sort of anorak. Some of the camera angles, I might make no apologies for it. Some of the camera angles in Las Vegas, it could have been Saudi, could have been Singapore. It was nondescript.
Look, I'm really inclined to agree. It's something that struck me. I've already kind of mentioned it, that watching over the course of the weekend, I was surprised, barring obviously the helicopter shot, because you could see a lot more than the circuit. That really put it in its place. And maybe one shot at the very end of the strip that sort of gave you a little bit of a panorama at the same time as the track. I was surprised how difficult it was to place where this race was taking place. I actually think I was thinking about it over the course of this weekend as well, because we also got the Qatar MotoGP going on at the same time, another night race. Night races all look really similar. The quality of the lights makes everything very grey and very, it lacks contrast and it lacks colour. I mentioned Qatar in particular because, like many Formula One races, there's always a session during the day. And it was so lively and colourful and interesting. And I know, Vegas is setting in the desert. It comes across as very beige during the day, but I can't help but wonder, in the context of wondering whether the times will change next year, whether actually it might benefit from getting an FP1 and an FP3 at dusk, or just before dusk, to get a little bit of variation in. Because I'm sort of thinking back now, and I know the weekend was very disrupted and there were obviously some real milestones that overshadowed others, but it's hard to even remember and pick out particular moments, because the images in my mind of this Grand Prix on television are all very samey. And I actually think on that metric, while obviously we've talked a lot about Las Vegas in the last week or fortnight really, and Formula One's talked a lot about it all year, I actually feel like I don't remember that much visually about Formula One's big money visit to Vegas. I remember the Sphere, which F1 doesn't own, or they put a lot of advertising on it, and I do remember the very big F1 logo, so I'll give them that. Yeah. But everything else, it was not iconic in the way I think I expected it to be, and I think that's actually something that needs to be considered, as much as an approach can be changed, to change that for next year, because otherwise Vegas looks like Saudi, looks like even Singapore. I actually think looks a little bit more distinct, but looks like Singapore. And in that case, you've spent a lot of money for a race that
how do you make a street track look iconic?
Well, not during the day when you can see what's happening outside of the street circuit.
But that's not going to happen, is it, man?
I think there's also an atmosphere element, though, too. Like, to go back to the point, I feel like I saw no people, and I think that was another element. And you don't have to see people, you don't have to see crowds at races. They go past very fast if you're looking at the car. But it just didn't. It didn't even feel like, I don't know. There was a lack of feeling about the pictures that I was seeing, and I don't know if that was translated in the event. I don't know if that's because it was such a VIP event, and VIPs, for all their money, tend not to create good atmosphere. But I think there's just something in that approach that needs to be tweaked for what was, at the end of the day, I guess, a successful event. But to make it memorable, I think there are a lot of little changes that need to be made. And I also think that's interesting in the context of this being the first race Formula One's promoted. I can't help but wonder, and maybe Ian, you might have a little bit of insight into this, how much Formula One feels like it's learned about being a promoter, because it's been very easy to, in the past, have a crack at promoters when they haven't delivered. I think there are a lot of elements that Formula One did not deliver this weekend, even if the event by the end of it was a success.
I don't think I'll ever do it anywhere else again, to be honest with you, because this event alone will eventually end up costing them. Well, if it runs through a 10-year contract, then they might make the money on it. But certainly, going into years 2 and 3, they're probably looking at certainly losses. So, whilst it's great, or whilst it has been great to be here to a certain extent, and Formula One eventually got the event that it had longed hoped for, the belief probably now is, well, at least we've got something we can build on, because the race was there, even if from that perspective, as you've rightly pointed out, we could have been anywhere. But as I said earlier, with any street circuit, because of the way television pictures are done, you could be anywhere. You know, if they'd eventually got a race going in Miami downtown, which would have been, we would all have hyped up to the max going into it, then again, you could have been anywhere. Because I know what Matt's saying, well, run it in the daytime. Well, you don't want to run Vegas in the daytime because it is beige, as the word you mentioned, Michael, and that's the word I used as well in our preview show. It's just very, very dull. And Vegas only comes alive at night. The problem, just to come back to another point as well that you mentioned, Michael, about having FP1 at dusk. The problem there is dusk here is about 4:30, 5 o'clock. So even that would be too early for this event because it wants to run wholly at night. But if you have an FP1 at, say, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, then you've got your night shots again. But yeah, going back to your original question, yeah, I don't think Formula One will ever promote another Grand Prix. Certainly not with the costs attached to this one, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think there's many lessons that have been learned over the course of the weekend. It's going to be an interesting year to see how they're applied for next year's Las Vegas Grand Prix. But before that, Ian, well, we've got Abu Dhabi, so I'm going to let you get home and get all of your 10 minutes of sleep before the next race. Hope you
and slightly aquary green.
Yeah. I think there are some colours involved. I think beige was more of an emotional description of the track
exactly,
than
yes,
necessarily the colour palette. Different description entirely. But that's all the time we've got for Pit Talk this week. We will be back next week to wrap up the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the last of this season, if you can believe it. You can subscribe to Pit Talk wherever you get your favourite podcasts, or you can watch the podcast on YouTube if you search for Fox Sports Australia. You can also follow updates throughout the week leading up to Abu Dhabi at both foxsports.com.au and speedcafe.com. Until then, from Matt Kosh, Ian Parks, and me, Michael Laminato, we'll catch you next time.
Thank you very much.